Lyddie, Chapter 12. I Will Not Be a Slave. She was good at her work, fast, nimble-fingered, diligent, and even in nearly unbearable heat of the weaving-room, apparently indefatigable. The overseer noticed from his high corner stool. Lyddie saw him watching, and she could tell by the smile on his little round lips that he was pleased with her. One afternoon a pair of foreign dignitaries toured the mill, and Mr. Marston brought them over to watch Lyddie work. She tried to smile politely, but she felt like a prize sow at the village auction. They didn't pause long. One of them spent the whole time mopping his face and his neck and muttering foreign phrases which Lyddie was sure had to do with the temperature rather than the marvels of the Concord Corporation. The others stood by blinking in perspiration from his eyes, looking as though he might faint at any moment. "One of our best girls," Mr. Marston said, beaming. "One of our very best." The pay reflected her proficiency. She was making almost $250 a week, above her $175 board, while the other girls grumbled that their pieces rates had dropped so that had hardly been worth slaving through the summer heat. She kept her silence. With Diana gone, she had no friends in the weaving-room. She worked too hard to waste precious time getting a drink of water or running out to the staircase to snatch a breath of fresh air. Besides, her Oliver was pasted up, and any free moment her eyes went to the text. She read and reread the page, for the day she had nearly had the words by heart. In this way she found that even the words that she had seemed impossible to decipher on the first reading began to make sense as she discovered their place in the story. The names, though peculiar, were the easiest because she remembered them from Betsy's reading. She liked the names. Mr. Bumble, a villain, but like her bear, a clumsy one. You had to laugh at his attempts to be somebody in a world that obviously that despised him. Miss Bill Sykes, a name like a rapier, a real villain with nothing to dilute the evil of him, not even Nancy's love. She did not ask herself how a woman could stay with a man like Sykes. Even in her short life she had known of women who clung to fearsome husbands. Fagin she understood a bit. If the world despised you so much, you were apt to seek revenge on it. The boy thieves, what choice did they have, with no homes or no family, only workhouses that pretended Christian charity, and dealt out in despair? She knew with a shudder how close her family had come to being at the mercy of the town that winter her mother had fled with the babies. Was it to save them from the poor farm that she had gone? Lyddie had not thought of it that way before. Her mother might have realized that she and Charlie, on their own, were stout enough to manage, but with the extra burden of their mother and the babies. Had her mother really thought that the bear was the devil on earth? Had she really thought the end was near? Lyddie wondered if she'd ever know the truth to that, any more than she would ever know what became of her father. A letter came to number 5 in her mother's handwriting. Lyddie felt a pang as she ran to fetch the coins to reimburse Miss Bedloes for the postage. She hadn't yet sent any money to her mother. She had been meaning to. She even had a few dollars set aside for the purpose, but her head had been tied up in other things. Her work, the boarding house, the dream world of a book. She had neglected the poor, who were her own flesh. She wanted to not have to open the letter. She wanted the letter to have never arrived, but there it was, and it had to be faced. Dear daughter, I was exceedingly surprised to get your letter concern your move to Lowell. I do not know to say. If you can send money, it will be a help to Judah and Clarissa. They fell a great burden. Baby Agnes is gone to God. Rachel is poorly. Many have died, but God's will be done. Your loving mother, Mattie M. Worthen. She tried to remember little Agnes's face. She strained, squinching her eyes tight to get a picture of her sister, now gone forever. She was a baby. She couldn't have been more than 4 the winter of the bear, but that was now nearly 2 years past. She would have changed. Maybe she didn't remember me, Lyddie thought. Could she have forgotten me and Charlie? Me, Lyddie, the one who washed and fed her. Dear Charlie, who made her laugh. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. Only a hard, dry knot in the place where her heart should have been. She must work harder. She must earn all the money to pay what they owed so she could gather her little family back together on the farm while she still had a family left to gather. The idea of living alone and orphaned and without a brother or sister, a life barren to land, like a family like Diana's, So it was that when the Concord Corporation once again speeded up the machinery, she, almost alone, did not complain. She only had 2 looms to tend instead of 4 she tended during the summer. She needed the money. She had to have the money. Some of the girls had no sooner come back from their summer holiday than went home again. They could not keep up the pace. Lyddie was given another loom, and then another, and even at the increased speed of each loom, she could tend all 4, and felt a satisfied disdain for those who could not work. Prudence was the first of her roommates to go home for good. The suitor in Rutland was urging her to give up the factory life, but there was more compelling reason for her return. She had begun coughing, a dry, painful cough, through the night that kept both Betsy and Amelia awake, though not Lyddie. She slept like a caterpillar in winter. Indeed, she was cocooned from all the rest. Betsy had not offered to read another novel to Lyddie since the summer. She and several other operatives had formed study groups, one in Latin and another in botany. On Tuesday and Thursday evenings, they commandeered half the parlor of number 5 and hired their own teacher. When Betsy wasn't downstairs with her group, she was in the room preparing for her next session. "Would you like me to read the text to you?" she asked Lyddie once, taking her nose out from between the pages of her botany book. Lyddie smiled and shook her head. She knew about plants and flowers, at least as much as she cared to know. She didn't know enough about Oliver Twist. With Prudence gone, the parlor congested, Amelia was often in the room. She insisted on talking, though Betsy, when there, ignored her, and Lyddie tried hard to. "The 2 of you should be exercising your bodies instead of holding up in this stuffy room reading," Amelia said. No answer. "Or at least be stretching your souls." No reply, though both Lyddie and Betsy knew Amelia was reminding them that it was the Sabbath, and neither of them had gone to services earlier. "What are you reading, Lyddie?" Maybe if I pretended not to hear her, she'll leave me alone. "Lyddie!" This time she spoke so sharply that Lyddie looked up startled. "Get your nose out of that book and come take a walk with me. We won't have many more lovely Sunday afternoons like this. It'll be getting cold soon." "I'm busy," Lyddie mumbled. Amelia came closer. "You've been reading that same book for months." She reached over and took Oliver Twist out of Lyddie's hands. "That's my book, eh? Come on, Lyddie. Just go for a short walk by the river before supper. It will do you good. Come on. Oh, will you get out of here before I gag her with my bonnet ribbons and lash her to the bedpost?" Betsy said tightly, never taking her eyes off of her own book. "She can walk by herself. I've got my book to read." Lyddie stretched her hand to take the book back out of Amelia, but Amelia held it just out of reach. "Oh, come on," she said. "You've already read this book. I've seen you, and besides, it's only a silly novel, not fit for reading, and a sin on the Sabbath." Lyddie could feel a gorge rising in her throat. Silly novel. It was life and death. "You ain't read it," she said, forgetting her grammar in her anger. "How can you know?" Amelia flushed. Her eyes blinked rapidly. She was no longer teasing. "I know about novels," she said, her voice high and a little shaky. "They are the devil's instrument to draw impressionable young minds to perdition." Lyddie stared at Amelia, with her mouth open. It was Betsy who spoke. "For pity's sake, Amelia, where did you ever hear such pompous nonsense?" Amelia's face grew redder. "You are unbelievers and scoffers, and I don't see how I can continue to live in the same room with you." "Oh, hush!" Betsy's tones were getting gentler than her words. "We do you no harm. Can we just live and let live?" Amelia began to cry. Her chiseled marble features crumbled into an angry, helpless rage of a child. As Lyddie watched, she could feel the hardness inside of herself breaking like a jagged cracks across granite. She got a clean handkerchief from her own box and handed it to the older girl. "Here," she said. Amelia glanced quickly at the hanky, making sure it was a clean one. Lyddie thought wryly, but she murmured a thank you and blew her nose. "I don't know what possessed me," she said, in her old tone. "We're all working like black slaves, is what," Betsy said. "I've half a mind to sign that blooming petition." "Oh, Betsy, you wouldn't." Amelia lifted her nose out of the handkerchief, her eyes wide. "Wouldn't I? Just... when I started the spinning room, I could do 13-hour day and 2 spare. But in those days, I had 130 spindles to tend. Now, I've twice that many, at a speed that would make the devil's curse. I'm worn out, Amelia. We're all worn out." "But we'd be paid less." Couldn't Betsy understand that? If we just worked 10 hours, we'd be paid much less. Should you sign the petition, Betsy, they'll dismiss you. I know they will, Amelia said, Amelia folded the handkerchief and handed it back to Lyddie with a nod. And would you miss me, Amelia? I thought you'd consider it good riddance. I thought I was a blister on your heel these last 4 years. I'm thinking of you. What will you do with no job? You'd be blacklisted. No other corporation would hire you. Oh, Betsy said, maybe I'd just take off west. I've nearly the money. She smiled slyly at Lyddie. I'm thinking of going out to Ohio. Ohio? Hurrah! Betsy cried out. That's it. I wait till I got all the money I need, sign the petition, and exit this city of spindles in a veritable fireworks of defiance. No, Lyddie was startled herself when she had spoken so sharply. Both girls looked at her. I mean, please, don't sign. I can't. I've got to have the money. I've got to pay the debts before... Oh, Lyddie, hasn't your friend Diana explained it all to you? We're working longer hours and tending more machines, all of which had been speeded to demon pace so the corporation can make a packet of money. Our real wages have gone down more often than they've gone up. Merciful heaven! Why waste our time on paper petition? Why not good old-fashioned turnout? Betsy put her botany book on the counterpane face down to save the place, hugged her knees, and began to sing like a high childlike soprano. Oh, isn't it a pity such a pretty girl as I should be sent to the factory to pine away and die? Oh, I cannot be a slave. I will not be a slave, for I am so fond of liberty that I cannot be a slave. I ain't a slave, said Lyddie fiercely. I ain't a slave. Of course you aren't. Amelia's confidence had returned, and with it her school-arm manner. At this inn I work sometimes 15, 16 hours a day, and they paid my mother 50 cents a week, if they remembered. Here. Oh, shush, girl. Nobody's calling you a slave. I was just singing an old song. How do you know that radical song? Amelia asked. I was a dofer back in '36. At 10, you learn all the songs. And did you join the turnout? Now Amelia looked like a schoolmarm who had caught a child in mischief. Betsy's eyes blazed. At 10, I let out my whole floor, running all the way. It was the most exciting day of my life. It does no good to rebel against authority. Well, it does me good. I'm sick of being a sniveling wage slave. Betsy picked up her botany book again, as though closing the discussion. I mean, it's unladylike, and it's against the scriptures. Amelia's voice was shaking as she spoke. Against the Bible to fight injustice? Oh, come on now, Amelia. I think you've got the wrong book at that church of yours. Lyddie looked from one angry face to another. She cared nothing for being a lady or being religious. She was making far more money than she could have ever made at home in Vermont, or was ever likely to. Why couldn't people just live and let live? The clang of the curfew bell quieted the argument, but not Lyddie's anxiety.